After 12 years of managing my father's enterprise, I ultimately valued it at $75 during a family supper. My father smiled at me and remarked, "Your brother will," as I took over. My heart sank, although I smiled in return. The following morning at work, everything had changed. I vividly recall the manner in which my father grinned that evening. His hand resting confidently on my brother's shoulder. As though he had predetermined his decision long before articulating the words that would alter everything. "Your brother." As I prepared to take over, I had a sinking sensation in my stomach. Although years of experience maintained my composure, I smiled in response. Feigning indifference to his words that penetrated me deeply, they were not dismantling 12 years of my life's work in an instant. The dining room resonated with the clinking of glasses and the subdued murmur of dialogues among extended family and intimate associates. This was not only a family supper, it was a celebration. A significant time intended to commemorate all that we had established. Everything I had constructed. My father founded Harper & Company when I was as a child. I observed my little logistics business barely surviving throughout its formative years. Witnessing the struggles it faced perpetuate its existence by laboring late into the night. Consistently sacrificing family holidays, pursuing an additional contract to achieve financial stability at the age of 24. Shortly after graduating from business school, he ultimately permitted me to enter the school. But I had to contend for that opportunity. I had accomplished more than merely intervening. I had revitalized Harper & Company from a faltering regional logistics concern into a national powerhouse. Expanding operations and securing million-dollar investments contracts incorporating advanced technology that was once a minor, nearly insolvent business now emerged as an industry leader valued at $75 million. And yet at this point, it was significant that my father had already determined that my brother Ethan would assume responsibility. A gradual ripple of acceptance circulated around the table, accompanied by murmurs congratulations directed towards Ethan, I observed as he averted his look. Embarrassed despite my awareness, Ethan had never genuinely committed to the business in which he had invested the last decade, transitioning from one unsuccessful endeavor to another. Perpetually failing to establish stability, he had little interest in logistics or operations, rather. He was captivated by power. I had invested 12 cents. Demonstrating my capabilities by establishing Harper & Company from inception, making difficult decisions, and engaging in late-night strategizing. None of the contract negotiations were conducted by Ethan. Nevertheless, we remained in this situation. I suppressed my emotions. Having learned long ago that in this household, exhibiting pain was perceived as a sign of weakness, I grasped my wine glass. Steadying my hand, Lisa smiled before lifting it to Ethan. I stated, my voice calm and controlled, as the guests raised their glasses. Oblivious to the tempest rising behind my eyes, my mother shot me a glance from across the table. Her expression was inscrutable, but I knew she understood. Unlike my father, who did not, she consistently acknowledged the effort I exerted, however. She refrained from intervening. She never did so at that time. My father was grinning with unshakable confidence. Utterly oblivious that his choice had set, Ethan met my eyes from across the table. A barely concealed smirk evident at the corner of his lips. At that time, I realized this was not solely my father's. Ethan had been anticipating this move and had strategically positioned himself. Ethan was fulfilling the role of the obedient son who had ultimately discovered his vocation. While my father, a staunch traditionalist, perceived no deficiency in his reasoning, a son should inherit the empire, while a daughter should not. They always viewed my efforts as fleeting, a mere blip in history. No matter how intense they were, she tried to prove the opposite. But they didn't realize or expect that I'd invested over a span of 12 years. I have not only established a company but also solidified my role inside it. Tomorrow morning, they would ascertain just what that had entailed. The previous night I scarcely slept as my thoughts incessantly recounted every sacrifice I had made for Harper & Company. The late hours and the missed opportunities. Birthdays signify the relationships that deteriorated due to my ambition. I had devoted all to this company. They now anticipated that I would only stand aside. They had underestimated me. By 3 a.m. I was in my home office, my fingers swiftly navigating the keyboard, processing each contract and every share. I possessed a deeper understanding of this company's inner workings than any executive agreement. Ethan believed he was entering a seamless transition, anticipating that by the following week, his name would adorn the office door the position was acquired. However, he was unaware that my father had been occupied with public appearances while my brother had been engaged in other activities of been busy pretending to understand the industry. But in reality, I've gained something far more valuable. Control Point 08, 45 hours. I entered the headquarters of Harper & Company like I had previously for the previous 12 years. The identical walls, the same clean floors, and the constant hum of efficiency improved as personnel acclimated to their routines. Nevertheless, today was an exception. Today, I was not entering my office, I was entering a battleground. The reception area was abnormally silent. Reminiscent of the stillness that precedes a tempest. Was aware that the whispers had already disseminated the news of my father's declaration at word. Disseminated rapidly, and staff regarded me with apprehensive faces, evading direct eye contact, uncertain of their allegiance. I disregarded them and proceeded further. Confidence emanates when my heels click on the marble floors. My posture resolute. Never allow them to perceive you as unsettled. I entered my office upon closing the door. I had exactly 15 minutes before my father and Ethan's arrival, anticipating they would assume their new roles as CEO and heir apparent. 15 minutes prior to the collapse of their meticulously arranged plans, I sat at my desk, inhaling deeply, and then activated my device. My computer screen displayed a list of private documents and contracts that had never been seen before. I reconsidered those I had presumed insignificant and reviewed my ownership. My hands paused above the keyboard for a moment before I selected the file titled Executive Shareholders Agreement. Followed by my wait. At exactly 9 a.m. there was a forceful pounding at my door. But no one responded. The door then swung open, and someone entered. I accompanied my father and Ethan, both radiating confidence. With Ethan's demeanor being particularly deliberate, my father surveyed his domain like a monarch, while Ethan, attired in an opulent navy suit, provided. My father, in his customary manner, said with a self-satisfied, triumphant grin, and it required all my will not to laugh. An authoritative tone, as though he were granting me a favor by recognizing my presence. I presume you are cognizant of the transformation occurring now. An intriguing selection of. I acknowledged my remarks while gently reclining in my chair, casting a glance at Ethan, whose sneer merely broadened as my father persisted in nodding. It appears that we are all in consensus about Ethan's appointment as the next CEO. I require your assistance with the handover to ensure he becomes acquainted with the operations prior to your official transition, Father. I believe you are mistaken. I repeated my perplexity with a raised eyebrow regarding a particular matter. His face contorted in annoyance. He was accustomed to my acquiescence. My capacity to comply silently caught him off guard. Lisa, he remarked, the tone is condescending, as if addressing a kid. This matter is not open for discussion. As it has already been settled. I made the decision and grinned, followed by a slow, knowing smile. Oh, I understand, Dad, I responded, gently. The fact is that you lack the authority to make that decision. Ethan, he emitted a subdued scoff, shaking his head. Lisa, do not complicate this. We are. I attempted to take the simpler approach, instead of responding. I reached out. I utilized the remote control and hit a button, causing the enormous screen on my office wall to illuminate with the same paper I had been examining. The last executive shareholders agreement signed in August. Signatories dated 17, 2015. Lisa Harper. James Harper. Father Ethan Harper. My father. My face paled significantly as I looked to Ethan and asked, do you even comprehend what this document is? He crossed his arms, squirming uncomfortably. As he speculated about a shareholders agreement, I nodded in affirmation and inquired if you were aware of its contents while I tapped the screen to emphasize a point. This document was made when Harper & Company was being restructured. It has an important clause that makes it clear that a majority vote is needed to transfer executive power, which includes hiring a new CEO. I caught my father's gaze. And he holds 60% of the company's shares. The ensuing stillness smothered. My father's expression darkened. Impossible, Ethan whispered, leaning forward to read the document. Actually, it's quite possible, he stated effortlessly. You see, Throughout the years, while you were preoccupied with your continual failures at every turn, I was engaged in another activity while my father assumed the job of the business patriarch at the startup you mentioned. As I advanced, I secured my position and turned to face my father. Recall that in 2017, when you required funds for expansion, you ceded an extra 15% of your shares to me in return for my investment. And in 2019, when we had that court dispute ensued regarding the transfer of an additional 10% in my name as collateral, which you neglected to reclaim. In addition to the initial 35% designates me as the main stakeholder. My father's jaw tightened. Although Ethan was in a state of panic. You must be BL. He said as I retrieved a second document. This is the latest legal document submitted to the state. I wish to confirm that Ethan seized the paper and scanned it. The visage loses color with each fleeting second. You cannot endure this. My father, who stammered, informed her that she could not go. However, he remained silent due to his own reservations. I understood that I had legally outmaneuvered him. Leaving him with no recourse, I sighed gently while rising up. I am not terminating your employment, Ethan. I stated that I would not like to do so. To compel you to enter the actual employment market. Although you will report to me and operate under my guidance, otherwise. He nodded toward the door, indicating that he was free to leave. Ethan turned to my father, his eyes imploring. But for the first time in his my father had no solution or means to rectify this situation. As it was not his enterprise, the silence in my office was stifling. Ethan remained immobile. He grasped the legal document in his palm, his fingers pale from excessive tension. But my father remained steadfast beside him. His expression was inscrutable. Yet I understood, he was deliberating, attempting to ascertain there was no escape. I had dedicated years to preparing for this moment, not due to an anticipation of treachery, but because experience had instructed me to never presume loyalty in the presence of authority. For the first time in my life, my father gazed at me as though he did not recognize me. Perhaps he never had. Ethan eventually replied, his voice tinged with bitterness. You are appropriating everything. I emitted a subdued, humorless laugh, absorbing all that I reiterated, approaching him. Ethan stated, I established this company from the ground up. Every contract, every expansion and innovation was realized by me while you were preoccupied with your unmerited advancement. I was diligently maintaining this. The company is operational. So I am not accepting anything. I leaned in slightly. I am merely. Ethan's expression contorted with wrath. Yet he had no counter-argument. He recognized my correctness. Moreover, my father also invested years in the belief that lineage held significance more than the capability. His son would inherit what was justly mine. He underestimated me. And now he is suffering the consequences of that error. My father ultimately confronted the situation. Silence. You are making an error, Lisa. His tone was composed and deliberate. Yet I could discern the pressure inside. A family necessitates unity. Do you truly wish to sever this connection? I met his look directly. Father, I stated deliberately, you irrevocably severed this connection the instant you made your decision unilaterally. His lips formed a narrow line. The line of business extends beyond an individual. We can identify a solution that is effective for everybody. I inclined my head slightly, seeming to contemplate. I concur. It is the reason I presented both options. Addressing Ethan first. You may remain with the company. I stated that I would maintain a smooth and professional tone. But you will not become CEO. Assume an advisory position with restricted authority. Your remuneration will be substantial. However, you will respond to me. Ethan tensed. However, I did not cease. I will proceed. You may exit. I will purchase your shares at market value, allowing you to take the funds and seek an alternative, a new project to engage in. My father laughed. You're acting as if you possess all the power. I smirked. I do. Silence ensued after my utterances. I allowed them to linger, enabling them to experience the sensation of powerlessness. Ultimately, my father breathed. He shook his head in surprise, expressing that he never anticipated you would take this action. He murmured, not to your own family. I had a sudden pang at his words. I intended to inform him that he was responsible for this. He chose to marginalize me, treating me as if I were transient. Nevertheless, I did not reciprocate this sentiment, as ultimately, it did not affect me regardless of the circumstances. My primary concern was to prevent them from seizing what I had constructed, now or at any future time. Ethan was the first to exit in a fit of anger. Good riddance. I was sufficiently acquainted with my brother to anticipate his subsequent action. He would seek refuge with our relatives and family acquaintances, portraying himself as a victim of corporate treachery. I was indifferent. As my purpose was not to seek their validation, my father hesitated briefly, seemingly anticipating a change of heart from me, when none occurred. He departed, a gradual nod. "You have transformed," he remarked softly. I met his gaze, no farther. He ultimately ceased his pretense and departed, prompting my exhalation upon resuming my seat. I ought to have felt triumphant. I had contended for my position and emerged victorious, nevertheless. As I gazed at the vacant doorway, I experienced an additional sentiment, a persistent, subdued pain. A facet of my being has perpetually sought my father's validation. A little desperate part of me believed that if I exerted sufficient effort and consistently demonstrated my worth, he would ultimately perceive me, yet the reality is that he had never genuinely observed me, and now he was compelled to recognize me for what I truly was, neither his daughter nor his. As a temporary stand-in for the genuine boss of Harper & Company, I redirected my attention to my computer. After 12 years of establishing this enterprise, I will now dedicate the next 12 years to making it invulnerable. Like my father and brother, had they attempted to deprive me of everything. Yet ultimately, they were the ones who lost everything for the first time for 12 years. My office felt devoid of life. Lacking phone calls from my father and any passive presence, Ethan's angry emails were met with silence, however. This stillness did not signify tranquility, implied that the conflict had commenced. I was aware that my father would not retreat silently. Ethan would fiercely contend to recapture what he believed was his birthright. I was not stupid enough to believe this was concluded, however. It had merely commenced. By the following morning, I could already perceive the prevailing sense of disquiet among the personnel, who had welcomed me with assurance the previous week, suddenly appeared hesitant, as if apprehensive about choosing a side. Several department heads averted their gaze. I was aware of the situation. My father and Ethan were collaborating inside the Whisper network of long-standing family friends and board members. Executives were instilling doubt by portraying me as cold, cutthroat, and disloyal. Ethan particularly assumed the character of the injured son, betrayed by his own sister. I can envision him presently seated in an exclusive restaurant, feigning sadness in his tone as he informs our investors about my actions usurped the company from him and my father, rendering any further commentary unnecessary. A significant exhalation, a nod of disapproval, and the meticulously chosen words, "I have always desired the best for my children. It was a planned and perilous endeavor because if they successfully turned my board members and top executives against me, perhaps enabling them to oust me from my own company, at the very least, I would not permit my leadership to be undermined." That afternoon, I initiated a call. An emergency executive meeting commenced. Upon entering the boardroom, I sensed the palpable anxiety. With half of the attendees averting their attention, the other half observed me intently, anticipating my misstep as I took my seat at the head of the table as my designated seat. "Let us not squander time," I stated this with a steady voice. I am aware that discussions have occurred discreetly, accompanied by beverages and muted tones. While I allow my gaze to traverse the room, lingered on each individual long enough to induce discomfort. "You are questioning the sustainability of my leadership." A few individuals were strained, but no one expressed concern. I tapped my fingers on the glossy wood table. "Let us clarify that I have displayed a presentation on the screen behind me, comprising numerical data and factual information, transformed this company from a failing regional enterprise into a $75 million industry leader over the past 5 years under my leadership. We have achieved a 300% rise in revenue and expanded into." Inquired with CFO Paul regarding the existence of a singular financial indicator for 6 new markets, implying that this company is struggling under my leadership. Paul hesitated before shaking his head. "Headcount predictions indicate another increase. There will be a 20% growth in the upcoming quarter." I acknowledged this. "So let us be candid about the situation." I leaned forward. "My father and brother are not displeased because the organization is facing difficulties. Their dissatisfaction stems not from my shortcomings as a leader but from their unmet expectations of me. to relinquish control and permit Ethan to assume leadership. Irrespective of qualifications, the findings indicated that the room was empty. After which I discarded the actual item, bomb. I am aware that several of you have been called during the past 24 hours extended inducements to encourage my resignation. I inclined my head slightly. Anyone present who wishes to reveal those conversations may do so now. This is your opportunity. A few individuals shuffled uneasily thereafter following an extended silence. One of the top executives cleared his throat, a call he acknowledged from your father, in which he stated he was contemplating making a formal appeal to the board. I acknowledged without surprise. And did he propose anything in return? In response to your support. I paused briefly and then nodded slowly. There it was. I exhaled while standing. My father established this company, I acknowledge that. But I assumed control, beyond anything he ever could have. And I will not permit him to manage it from the outside. I lowered my voice slightly. Maintaining control. It would be perilous. If he desires a confrontation, he shall receive it. As I collected my documents, I made eye contact with each executive, questioning if anyone present. I believe my father and brother deserve power. Now is the moment to act. Silence prevailed, and no one moved. Good. I exited with my head held high. This was not solely about preserving my firm, this was about ensuring they never believed they could seize it from me again. That night, I made my own decision. Not to have a board member addressing the media rather than an investor by morning regarding the business. A segment of every prominent news outlet featured the identical headline, "Powers Shift at Harper & Company. Lisa Harper outmaneuvers family." In the boardroom confrontation. I had executed my strategy, now it was their turn. And I awaited their response the morning following the publication of my tale. My inbox was inundated with emails and missed calls, correspondence from journalists, investors, and board members varied in sentiment. Some expressed support while others did not. They were wary, however. The majority had a single inquiry: is it true? I permitted them. I was aware of the game my father had been perfecting for decades. The significance of public perception was understood. He recognized that reputation carried substantial influence in commerce. If he was unable to conquer me in the boardroom, he would seek to damage my reputation publicly, which was precisely his intention. By midday, the initial counterattack commenced. A meticulously composed press statement, artfully articulated yet replete with Harper & Company has consistently operated as a family-run enterprise. And we are disheartened that occurrences have occurred, yet we remain steadfast in our commitment to respect the ideals that established our organization. Changes in leadership are underway. It is unavoidable. And we aspire to shift seamlessly as we go. It was understated. Yet I comprehended its significance. Essentially, I was asserting that Lisa is reckless, unstable, and not a collaborative team member. I was not surprised, yet I was irritated as I sat in my office watching the news industry. Analysts disputed if Lisa Harper's leadership was excessively forceful. Will her lack of cooperation adversely affect the organization in the long term? Can she recuperate from this public relations debacle? I conversed as though I were not observing, as if I were not already strategizing my subsequent action. For if my father and Ethan desired a public war, I intended to provide them with one. I did not issue a statement. Rather than convening a news conference, I made a single phone call to an old acquaintance. I have information for you. Investigative journalism, but you must act swiftly. 1 hour later, I transmitted the internal financial reports via email. Documents indicate that Harper & Company, under my father's direction, had participated in dubious business practices over the years, which I had devoted the previous decade to discreetly rectifying, collapsed within 24 hours, revealing a legacy of concealed issues at Harper & Company, indebtedness, and financial concealments. The report was harsh yet commended my leadership for rectifying the company's financial health. It condemned my father's previous mismanagement, and most significantly, it demonstrated that I was the sole cause for Harper & Company's survival. So altering the narrative, the board ceased their skepticism, the investors eliminated their reservations, and my father found himself with no refuge for 2 days. Subsequently, my father eventually contacted me. I let the phone ring 3 times before responding. "Lisa," he stated, his voice strained, "we must converse." I reclined in my chair, followed by stillness, and ultimately, a sigh. You need not have done it, I chuckled softly. Nor did you. This business, he claimed, it was intended to be a legacy for the family. For both of you, I had a familiar pang. The imprudent part of me had previously desired that as well. But no more, Dad, I stated softly. If that is what you wished, it was my duty to protect the legacy. You ought to have given it to me. Instead, you attempted to seize it from me. Resulting in another prolonged stillness, he then inquired, almost hesitantly, about the subsequent course of action. To which I exhaled, gradually. I ensured that they could never interfere with my company again. The conflict was my father had lost. Ethan had vanished, and I had emerged victorious, but, as I sat in my office, gazing at the metropolitan skyline, I experienced no satisfaction whatsoever. Triumph yielded only emptiness after I dedicated 12 years to battling for Harper & Company. Constructing it, safeguarding it, and enhancing its strength more than ever before. However, the cost of that victory proved to be more burdensome than anticipated. Since I had secured my position but sacrificed something in the process. Alternatively, my family and I proceeded the following day, and I entered the office as though nothing had altered. Yet all were aware of the truth. The whispers had ceased. The uncertainty had dissipated. I was no longer merely Lisa Harper, the CEO. I was Lisa Harper, the woman who had outsmarted her father and brother and emerged victorious, garnered both respect and dread from others. Some continued to anticipate my downfall. And I allowed them to wait until noon. My father and I convened in the conference room for what would be our concluding session. He appeared fatigued and aged. As if burdened by the weight of what had transpired had now descended upon him. And I awaited his utterance. Initially, when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever encountered. He stated succinctly that he is retiring. I did not respond immediately. I had anticipated this. I will sell my remaining shares. I will retain a minor stake as an investor. But I will no longer participate. I have scrutinized him meticulously. His jaw hardened. He has departed. My father acknowledged, having accepted his own conflicts, after it became evident he had been defeated. He resorted to his customary actions. Running. I continued to hear it audibly, provoking an inside agony, not of sorrow, guilt. Merely the inevitability of it all prompted my assent. I comprehended. My father exhaled, massaging his temple as though he were experiencing a headache. Following an extended silence, he articulated a statement that I had not anticipated and had misjudged. It was hardly an apology, but it was the nearest semblance I would ever receive. Curiously, I discovered that I no longer required it. A month later at Harper & Company, with the departure of the old board members who had aligned themselves with my father and Ethan, Harper & Company barely resembled its previous state. The executives who questioned my leadership replaced the company, which had consistently thrived under my direction. It was now unequivocally mine. And with that authority emerged a novel perspective that I presented. Undertakings my father consistently dismissed as updated systems he labeled excessive expansion into industries he had previously been too cautious to investigate. Within 6 months, profits surged, and within a year, we surpassed the $100 million threshold for the first time in my life. I was not merely striving to validate my worth, I was endeavoring to construct something that. A year after the events transpired, I met my father for supper. A moment that no one could ever deprive me of again. It was the first occasion we had conversed since his retirement. He appeared altered, more subdued, and devoid of anger. He remarked over his drink that he had read about the recent business you finalized. It was a clever maneuver. I smirked subtly, aware that a faint smile graced his lips. There was no longer any tension between us. No conflict remaining to confront. Simply simplicity. It is an irrefutable truth that he attempted to marginalize me, and I successfully demonstrated his error. He raised his glass to Harper & Company, declaring that this time, when he clinked his, it was a moment of peace. When I pressed my glass against his, I felt neither wrath nor bitterness, only tranquility. Just as I had before, I have already achieved victory and no longer require his validation to acknowledge it. As I sit in my office today, as I gaze across the city where I established my empire, I reflect on the teachings this voyage has imparted regarding the significance of family. Your greatest adversary is the notion that loyalty serves as a currency rather than a guarantee. Whereas power as it is never given, it is taken. However, it is crucial to recognize that at times, the most effective approach, to demonstrate your value, cease the pursuit of validation, and construct something robust. They will never be able to disregard you again. I harbor no regrets. Harper & Company is mine. I am determined to ensure that it is never forgotten.